Welcome to The Fast Track, the podcast that helps get Kiwis into their first homes faster. I'm Derek, the founder of Aera, and today I'm joined again by Laura, one of our first home coaches, with a bunch more questions from first home buyers. Hi, Laura. How are you? Welcome back.
Hi, thank you, Derek. So I've got here a list of more questions that we get asked by our members, and I just wanted your perspective. We're going to talk today about the timing of the market, what developers to trust, is it better to buy or invest, and things like that.
Let's go.
Cool. So first question is it smarter to keep renting and investing into their shares, for example, instead of buying a house?
So people ask you this when they start thinking about whether they want to make the move or not?
Yep.
And what are they nervous about, do you think?
I think because buying a house is such a big financial decision, they just want to make sure that they're making the correct decision for their money in the future.
Yeah, and it's totally fair enough, right? So I think the thing about New Zealand is we have this long-term market that is consistently going up 6 to 7% a year, and we have long-term rental dynamics where the market also goes up 4 to 5% a year. So if you're going to choose before you've bought a home to invest in the market or the stock market or something, you need to be super confident that what you do is going to outperform whatever's happening in the housing market to be able to afford to rent or buy down the track. Our view is you have to be very clever to be able to do that. You have to have really good advice, you have to be an exceptional investor, and you have to be exceptionally disciplined with all that money that you otherwise would have been putting into paying off the mortgage. Because once people have a mortgage, they're extremely disciplined about keeping it. But if it's just loose money and you're saying you're going to invest it, it's also very easy to go and dip in and dip out of it. So one of the key things that we think about buying a home is it's massively psychologically beneficial, not just financially, because you're committing every month, every week, you're putting some money away, and you know you're putting into an asset that's growing and it's defending you against the rising price of renting and owning a home. So it's very challenging, I think, in New Zealand market to invest out-invest your way out of getting, a home in the future.
I also think there is a bit of a trend in American pop culture that the advice is to invest into shares instead of buying a house. But I want to comment on that particularly because you used to live there, right? Because the market there is quite different, both housing market and the business market. So what's your view on that?
So there's a few things. One, a lot of housing markets in the US don't increase in value. They're oversupplied. There's plenty of houses. It's not that difficult to buy a house in most parts of America. In the big cities, of course, it's different. But in the middle of America, you can buy houses for a few $100,000, lots of land and all that kind of stuff. Number two, they've got a huge culture of what they call 401k, which is your retirement fund. And companies invest heavily in your retirement fund when you have a job. And you build up a significant 401k, which gets you in a much better position for retirement than how people are treating KiwiSaver in New Zealand. So at the moment, you only need to put 3% in. A lot of people don't put any in. In other countries in the world, they're putting 12, 15, that kind of percentage, which does set you up for retirement. So in New Zealand, the primary vehicle to get yourself set up for retirement, at least to start, is your home, unless you're super disciplined about putting so much more money into a retirement fund. And that's one of the key differences between most countries, the UK, Australia, and the US, and New Zealand.
And I guess their rents also aren't going up as much, so it's a bit
in
more
most markets,
number.
it's not. In the bigger cities, it will be, but that's, again, a minority of where people are living, whereas across New Zealand, everything continues to go up, the cost to build a house and the cost to rent a house.
Yeah, so it's important for our members to get advice from local advisors.
Exactly, because you can spend time on social
sources.
And get a lot of feedback that says, oh, that's a dumb idea. But it's a different market, it's a different context. And fundamentally, apart from that, you have to be convinced that you've got the willpower and the discipline to invest all that money properly.
Yeah.
And it's just so easy to dip into a shares or dip into a fund and just pull money out, whereas you can't do that with a house.
Exactly. Second question is about timing. So we're just getting into summer, end of 2025. Is now a good time to buy?
Really interesting question. People are always asking it. I think if you look back at the last 40 years and you asked anyone, was it a good time to buy? There are 2 or 3 pieces of, 2 or 3 months where it wasn't a great time to buy, but almost every other week or month in the last 40 years was a good time to buy, right? So when you're in a market like New Zealand and it's consistently over the long term moving, it's much more about how long you stay in the market, right? That you buy a home and you stay in it and you invest in it and you pay it off. And after 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 years, it always ends up being positive and an outcome that people never regret, right? Right now, we're in a lull. It's been quite challenging the last few years with all the interest rates being so high. Finally, the Reserve Bank's figured out they've got it so wrong over the last few years. They've cut, the interest rates even harder in the last month, down another 0.5%. So it's actually becoming more and more attractive to buy a home, right? And the prices have really stabilized after dropping after post-COVID. So right now, if you're trying to buy a first home, trying to time it any more than where you are now seems to be quite foolish.
Exactly. And so I've been in property for about 7 years, and I've seen it before where the market is good and people are waiting because they think the prices are going to drop. And then within a week, it changes. Within a week, everything's on auction. So while you're trying to find a good time to buy, make sure you don't miss your perfect timing.
Right, the window. And, I mean, no one's got a crystal ball, but I'm imagining that kind of turn will happen next year. I think there's a lot of sentiment, a lot of expectation that things will be better next year on the whole in New Zealand. And all it takes is a tiny turn in confidence for something that became like, oh, you can take your time, take 2 or 3 weeks, to being a situation where actually the thing you liked on Friday is gone by Monday. Because once people get that sense that they might miss out, everything becomes so kind of primal and people make decisions in different ways. So for better or worse, I'm reckoning that's something that's going to start happening either at the beginning or the end of the summer or as it begins the new year.
Yeah, all signs point to that. And another comment I get is, what if prices drop right after I buy?
So, you're buying a house to live in, you're buying a house to raise your family, you're buying a house knowing that your mortgage is, if you're probably normal, 25 to 30 years. So you're buying something that even the bank is thinking that you should be owning this on a horizon of that long, right? So it's not the stock market, it's not stocks, and it's something that you should be thinking about over the medium-term horizon, right? So if it just something changes in the market in the next 3 months and it goes slightly down on those websites, you kind of shouldn't be focused on it because you're trying to build your equity by paying away down the mortgage and those kinds of things and thinking about you're in this for at least a few years, if not 5 or 7, before you're thinking about moving or changing.
Yeah, and with the house that you intend to live in my situation, for example, since we bought our house end of last year, never once I thought, oh, has the value dropped? I just stopped thinking about it. What I'm focusing now is that I have the safety. This is the house I live in. This is the house I own. And I'm focusing on paying off the mortgage because that's what's going to make me financially free in like 10, 15 years. So your focus changes very quickly when you own that house.
That's an awesome point because once you're in it, it becomes a part of your life and becomes part of your lifestyle and you're not kind of checking every day, what the value of it is.
Yeah, so next few questions are going to be about developers, new builds. Aren't new builds more expensive?
So people think that when they talk to you, that they think like for like, they're more expensive?
Yes, yeah.
And how do they make that comparison?
I think they see what's on the market and also they see how much land comes with a new build versus an existing home.
Right. So I think that's really interesting. In a certain market environment, it may be that you look around the corner and there's a home that's an existing home and it might be for a similar price and might have a little bit more land, so you think the new build might be more expensive. I guess everything in a brand new home is brand new. So all the hidden costs in an existing home are things that you don't know you're going to have to encounter, right? So everything from the wiring, the electricity, the heating, the kitchen, all that kind of stuff. So there is a premium in a sense that if you've just bought something that was made yesterday, you're paying yesterday or today's prices for all of those goods. Whereas if you bought something that contains equipment and infrastructure in a house that was built 30 years ago, then you're buying stuff that's 30 years old. It doesn't look like it on paper that you may need to upgrade all of those things over time. There may be situations where you could get more land or a bit more space in an existing home for the same price. But what you're trying to figure out is what kind of home you can afford, right? So if you can afford a home that only gets you a budget that actually what's in the market is brand new homes. So if you look at, say, in Auckland, it's pretty hard to find existing homes around the 600 or 550 mark. The only option becomes looking at brand new homes as well, right? So it depends where you are. And in Christchurch, I think the argument is even harder where you can get land and everything is brand new garage, all that kind of stuff. So there's partly the question of, is it actually more expensive from a true cost of ownership, like over time? And then there's partly the question is, well, actually, what can you afford? Like what's actually in your budget?
Okay, so basically what you're saying is that new builds come with included costs of potential repairs, maintenance over the next 10 to 30 years, which on existing homes you have to cash out for, right?
Right, which no one does the maths on that.
Exactly.
They don't do the maths on the garage door needs to be replaced in 2 years and it's going to cost you 5 or 10 grand.
Yeah, and by adding those, you actually come to the cost of a new build. The other thing we have to remember, again, is that can you actually afford an existing home with your deposit?
Exactly.
And when the question is, do I buy a new build or do I buy no home at all? That's
the other invisible cost of ownership. So if you're waiting 2 or 3 more years to build a deposit and to be able to service that home, then you're also missing out on being able to live in the house. In that
Exactly.
interim.
And you're missing out on capital growth over those 2 or 3 years, which then your existing home may cost even more than your new build was 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, in a normal market, it always will.
Yeah.
So what else have you got?
My other question, another question that I get asked a lot is, can I trust developers? What if it's a low quality or they go bust?
Yeah, and that's a very valid question because in New Zealand, every cycle, there's always the New Zealand Herald article about developers that have gone under and they end up, sometimes running away with the deposit and all that kind of stuff. And so there's no doubt that New Zealand has a culture and multiple cycles of small developers crushing first home buyers, right? So they are shady, they cut corners, they take deposit money to fund their development versus it staying in a trust account. They're not transparent about milestones and where the building is at. And these stories always end up in the media because they're like shock horror stories, which the media love to talk about. They don't talk about the 25,000 homes that were successful. They talk about the 10 homes or 100 homes that weren't. So the fear is really founded. And I guess how we tackle it at Aera is looking at the background and the history and the success track record of all the developers that we work with, which mostly are the tier one, largest ones, the ones that have been going for as long as possible. And those kinds of brands that give you confidence that these guys are not fly by night. They're established, they're committed, and they have the capital to follow through with all their projects.
Yeah, and I guess the other point is how many older homes get sold and the buyers get completely,
Screwed over.
Screwed over, yeah.
Yeah. No, there's huge Reddit threads about
the
this.
doors and with
Yeah.
plaster in the exterior and things like that. It's just it
And
doesn't
water
make it to
damage.
the news. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's probably far more common than the issues that come with brand new homes. When we wrote the book earlier this year, The Fastest Way to Your First Home, there was a whole section in it where we just pulled from Reddit all of these comments in the thread about how screwed over people had got when they discovered things that weren't discoverable at the beginning when they bought the home.
Yeah.
So those stories never make it to the news, but they're far more common for a house that's 30 or 40 or 50 years old, but they're just not as exciting to write about because it wasn't a big company that screwed them over. It wasn't someone who built a company that took people's money. So partly it's about reputation, partly it's about brand, partly it's looking at what they've built in the past, what's the quality of it. And for most developers, there's a benefit where you can go and see those houses and you can go into their showrooms and you can touch and feel what does it look like. And then you can get a sense of, okay, these guys are cheaper because of this. They use non-brand appliances or they do this and that. But that's why it's more affordable. If you go to another one, everything's a Samsung or whatever, and that's slightly more expensive. So you can kind of gauge where people are at.
Yeah, so it's actually easier to get screwed over by an individual buyer when you buy a 30-year-old house than a developer.
Exactly. And unfortunately, there's a lot of agents that have done this in the past. Real estate agents where they cover things up. They've bought a property from someone and immediately sold it on. There's stories where the intermediaries themselves are not even legitimate or trustworthy. So you kind of have these multiple layers of where something could go wrong. And a building inspection will tell you so much, but I think a lot of people also ignore, what actually comes out of a building inspection and go ahead anyway.
And along the same lines, will the new build actually be finished on time?
So you're talking about if someone's going to buy something that's being built over time and isn't ready, right?
Yeah.
Yes, there's some interesting things around this which we could talk about. One is the timing and the other is how you finance it, which is a really common question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So timing-wise, most brand new homes, when you buy them, let's say off the plan, or you're buying a piece of land and they're building a house, which is a different method of buying a house, there's a schedule that they're going to propose to you in the sale and purchase agreement. And by and large, our experience is that people meet that schedule. Sometimes there are delays with the titling of the land or some, issues related to the council, things like that. But by and large, if the company knows how to build houses, which generally we work with people who do, and they have the resources and the team, then they have a timeline that they can generally commit to. So that's in the current market. That's in, I think, normal times. Definitely during COVID, that went out the window. People were taking really long to build houses. Materials were short, labor was short, everything was costing more by the day. So if you're in those kind of crazy peak conditions, there are situations where it took far too long to build a house. And that's a situation where we're not in at the moment. I can't see us being there very soon. But generally, great builders and great developers build on time because they want to complete the project, get their money and move on. There's
Because
no incentive
it's
for
costing
them.
them longer when they hold the land and do the build, so they want to get it out of the way quickly as well.
Exactly.
But in a situation when a build doesn't get finished in time, what does a member do then?
Well, in the contract for a home that's being built, there's going to be something that's called a sunset clause, which is basically a timeline that the developer needs to meet, right, to complete the house. And depending on your lawyer and how you've negotiated it, one or other of the parties have the right to cancel the agreement if it's not built by that sunset clause. This is not an easy clause to navigate in certain environments because it depends who has the right to close to cut it off. So I had a situation during COVID where the house prices were moving and we were getting close to the sunset clause, and either party had the right to cancel it in a sense, and the developer could have cancelled it because the house price was actually much higher than what we'd agreed in, you know?
Yeah.
So it works kind of both ways. You want a situation where you've got your plan with your lawyer that you're protected, and if it's taking too long and you want to exit, you can. But you also don't want just to have the day tick over and then you're not able to buy the house, you know? So you want to be able to protect your scenario that you actually can move in, even if it's going to take a month or more. I guess all of these things come down to like really good communication with the developer, with their lawyer, and with your lawyer, so that you're navigating those possibilities, but also them communicating really clearly how they're tracking against their timeline.
And last question, and this is the one that we get a lot. Say a member wants to build a house. What kind of financing options do they have?
So there's two main ways to finance a brand new home that doesn't already exist that you're just going to buy. There's turnkey, and there's the land and build progressive payments, right? So turnkey is by far the simplest. And basically what it means is the developer or the builder is taking on all the risk and they're funding all the development. All you do is you put a deposit down and then you wait until they're finished. And that's when the bank comes in, you get your mortgage and they pay the rest off and you own the house. So there's two payments. We recommend that a lot because it's far simpler. It's easier to plan. You're not paying rent and a second mortgage at the same time. And by and large, that's what we do. But it's slightly more expensive because the builders had to take on all that cost. And they've got to get that money from somewhere and they get it from some other lender. And so they're paying money out the door. And the second option is where you've chosen a piece of land and they have to buy it and you pay a deposit and you're starting to pay mortgage on that piece of land. And then as they build, there'll be like 3 or 4 or 5 milestones and they'll keep asking for more and more money. So you're paying it off over time. And by the time you get to the end, you've paid it all off and they've built the house. But what that means is the mortgage starts getting drawn down while the house is being built, while you're also paying rent. So then in that situation, you have to be able to finance your rent and your living costs and any other deposit that you're saving, as well as servicing the mortgage that gets drawn down while the house is being built. So as you can see, it's more complex. You're going to have more money going out the door while you're still paying rent in your current home. But at the end, you'll have paid off a bunch of it by the time it gets to that, finish line. Those situations can be slightly cheaper because then you're not asking the developer to finance that build.
But for first-time buyers, we find that a lot of the times the second option is unaffordable.
Yeah, the second option can be unaffordable because it's like, well, are you able to service while you're paying your rent?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
the overheads of being in that house,
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Derek.
It's been awesome to have you on again, Laura. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us. And if you enjoyed this episode of The Fast Track, please be sure to subscribe, follow us on our socials. And if you haven't downloaded the Aera app already, get into it and download it. See you next time.